So the origin of this guide was that there was conversations happening between the PaSH Partnership, that's BHA, George House Trust, and LGBT Foundation, and the commissioners of the services. And we felt the need to include private organizations in the work to help end HIV stigma and raise awareness of HIV. And we also felt that we needed a resource to support working people living with HIV. So it's a project that's been funded by Hive, and Hive is a project that's within the PaSH project, aimed to upscale the activities that we do. And special thanks to Vicky Morris, the manager of Hive, for helping us realize this booklet. And like I say, it's gone from an idea to it now being in my hands, which is great. So really excited about that. From the very start, this book has been a collaboration between the PaSH partnerships and many, many people that have provided feedback and reviewed the guide. So I'm so grateful, particularly to Colin, who's here today, for answering the many questions and emails that I had and reviewing the guide, 5 to 10 times. I don't know. It was yeah, couldn't have done it without you, Colin. And we had a wonderful designer as well, Jen Corcoran of 2711. Jen did a wonderful job designing the booklet, which I'll show you in a moment. It really is wonderful. And we had a wonderful illustrator as well, Shilvan da Costa, who provided illustrations for the guide. So really from the very start, it was a collaboration. And we've got the finished product now, and I'll show you the guide. So, oh yes, here we go. So the guide is now live on the BHA website. Can someone just give me a thumbs up that you can see that? Okay, great. So this is the home screen of BHA's website. If you go to our services and resources, you'll see this guide amongst some other guides that have been produced, and you can click on this guide. It's now available to download for free. You just have to click this link here and you can download a PDF. Feel free to do that and use it as you wish. And here is a preview of the guide, which I'll show you now. So the guide is called HIV in the Workplace, a guide for employers and employees. As you can see, it's been wonderfully illustrated, and we've got an introduction to HIV in the workplace, HIV in the Equality Act. We talk about things such as confidentiality, recruitment, reasonable adjustments at work. And then the guide also goes into ending HIV stigma and challenging HIV stigma in the workplace, as well as providing case studies and frequently asked questions to provide lots of examples so that both employers using the guide and employees using the guide can feel confident that they will get the advice and information that they need. The guide originally started as being an idea for 2 guides, one for employees and one for employers, but in the end we decided it was best to merge the 2. So we've got everything that we need in one place. Here you can see the lovely illustrations that Shilvan did for us, put together in a wonderful design by Jen. I'll just flick through it quickly, and after the event, you guys can feel free to look at it in your own time and download it and use it as you see fit. So there we have it. Produced by the PaSH Partnership and funded by Greater Manchester Integrated Care Partnership. So we'll just stop that. So that's a brief introduction and overview of the guide, and I'll hand over to Colin now to just talk to us about why this guide is necessary today. Thanks, Colin.
Many thanks, Joe. It was a pleasure working on the guide, and you weren't too much trouble, really. But let me just give you a little bit of background. I suppose from our perspective as a HIV support organisation, we do see a lot of people who have faced discrimination in work, or who are anxious about entering the job market. I think it's really important to say that, the huge advances that have been made in treatment now mean that people diagnosed with HIV are living long, healthy lives in the main and are being productive employees in all kinds of industries and organizations. If you're an employer on this call at the moment, it could well be, and may well be, that you have employees in your workforce who are living with HIV. But as there's no legal obligation on an employee to tell an employer about HIV status, apart from in some very specific circumstances, you may not know whether or not you have employees who are living with HIV. If an employee chooses to discuss HIV status with you, we do hope that this resource will be useful in terms of what we might want to call the what's to do next. HIV remains a highly stigmatized medical condition, and self-stigma around HIV impacts often on people's motivations to seek employment or to remain in employment after a diagnosis. And stigma is just one of the barriers faced by people living with HIV. And I wanted just to give a couple of, for obvious reasons, very anonymized examples of people we've worked with who had problems in the workplace. Someone we supported recently told their line manager about a recent HIV diagnosis and was told in return that they should stop directly interacting with customers in the shop where he worked immediately, so as to, in inverted commas, minimize any risk. Someone else we supported was told by a line manager that they would need to tell all of their colleagues about a recent HIV diagnosis, just in case. And of course, in both of these situations, the effect on the employee of this completely absurd advice after a diagnosis was to absolutely further compound the kind of feelings, the negative feelings that those people were going through after their diagnosis, and the self-stigma that is often felt by people after a diagnosis. So that's just a couple of examples. I mean, we do have others. I haven't got time to go into all of them, but we do know that for some people living with HIV, managing work can be difficult, often because of the reactions of either line managers or colleagues. People living with HIV aren't always aware themselves of what they should expect from employers. And so navigating the work environment when living with HIV can be difficult. For example, people tell us that they often aren't clear whether they have to tell an employer about their HIV status. People are anxious about confidentiality, a consequence again of the stigma that still surrounds HIV in 2023. We do want all employers in our region to be HIV aware and to be able to provide the appropriate support and information to their positive employees. And we do hope that this new resource will help you to do that. Many of you, I hope many of you, if not all of you, will know that HIV is covered under the Equality Act, meaning, amongst other things, that reasonable adjustments do need to be considered if an employee living with HIV requests them. And as Joe pointed out, we've got a section on reasonable adjustments in the booklet. And I think sometimes for employers, the concept of reasonable adjustments can be quite scary, in that I think people often think that they're going to be huge adjustments people are going to have to make to somebody's work practice or work patterns. But what I would say is that the vast majority of people living with HIV will not need any major reasonable adjustments. Examples might be occasional time off for clinic appointments, or a shift change to enable people to deal with any side effects potentially of a new medication. And again, we really hope that this resource will help employers think about reasonable adjustments and what this means for the employee as well as for the employer. Whilst I've got the floor, I also did want to say something about health questionnaires. This is something that comes up with us a lot with people we support who are looking to find employment. What we know, and again, I hope everybody on this call knows, is that prospective employees cannot be asked about their health unless a provisional offer of a job has been made. We have certainly, again, had examples of people who've applied for jobs and had a health questionnaire attached to the job application. And we then, for obvious reasons, advise people not to complete it. But I would make a request of any of you on the call who are employers. After this session, please go and check whether you ask about HIV on any health questionnaires you ask prospective employees to complete. And if you do, please spend a little time asking yourself, talking to your colleagues about why you're asking about HIV status. The fact alone that someone is living with HIV should have no impact whatsoever on their ability to do the job you've offered them. It's an unnecessary question about a medical condition which is already stigmatized more than any other. And asking about it may just be, and probably will be, another barrier in the way of someone living with HIV wanting to get into employment. So I do hope you will have a look at health questionnaires. It is something that comes up a lot with us when people are being asked questions about their HIV status, when it has absolutely nothing to do with their ability to do the job they've been offered. I think, some of those examples I've given there do tell you why we need this guide. And what we certainly don't want to do is make out that all employers in the region are terrible employers. That's certainly not the case. There are lots of good stories about employers being very supportive and very understanding when people have talked about HIV. For us, it's being HIV aware. It's being open to your employers who are living with HIV. It's having conversations about HIV. It's normalizing conversations about HIV so that people don't feel scared or anxious about sharing their HIV status if they choose to with a line manager or with colleagues. So we really hope that this resource will support you, will be informative and will be helpful. And finally, if you do have any questions relating to HIV and employment, or if you know somebody that might need some support around employment, then please do get in touch with us. You can refer people if you know somebody who might need some extra support through our website, ght.org.uk. Or if you do have any questions that aren't answered in the session, please email us and we'll try to answer them for you. Our email is info@ght.org.uk. Thank you.
Amazing, Colin. Thank you. Could you maybe just write those email and web address in the chat for everyone as well? That's great. Thank you so much for that overview of what's in the guide and why it's necessary. Let's go to Anita now. Anita's going to talk to us about some personal experiences of discrimination within the workplace.
Hi, my name's Anita and I've been positive since 1987, 1988. HIV has never been as impacted on me. Obviously, the first few years really of discovering your status, things could become really difficult. But I've managed to live a very full and adventurous and very happy life. I started a position and was there for 5 years. And in all them years that I worked there, I was the person who brought cakes in, made the desk look pretty for Christmases and birthdays, and made fun days out. And the impact that finding out my status had on me, I'm still recovering from. And it basically started just before we started with the COVID. And I worked in sales, so it was in an office where it was like desks, telesales staff. It's always very competitive and there's a lot of egos that happen to be in the office. And there was one particular person who I was pretty good at my job. I never had any complaints and was quite successful at my achievements. And this particular person found out my status, and we'd been really friendly previous to that. And he obviously found a reason to be antagonistic. There was up to 22 people in my space in the office, and that particular morning I came in and there was 2 young girls sat down and he was sat facing them. And as I came in, I was like, "Good morning." And he just looked and gave this horrible look, which was like something out of a horror movie, and just turned around and he said, "Well, if someone gave me HIV, I'd kill myself too." And he was referring to a previous partner who, through mental health issues, had taken his own life. It was nothing to do with my HIV. Instantly, I just felt a rock in my heart. I sat at my desk, tried not to cry, looked at the other 2 girls, and they kind of put their heads down. And I was like, has something been said? And they automatically didn't want to get involved. That was we don't want to get involved. But he'd left the office space. And as everyone was coming in, he was informing them of what he'd found out about me. In my office, in the job I was in, my HIV status was not necessary to share. I wasn't in any position to be doing anything with anyone in that office that would put them at risk, and there was no risk from me. And it's something I didn't feel necessary to share. By the end of that day, it was so hard. The things that were being said, mutterings, people saying things as they went past my desk, was pretty awful. This went on for about 6 months. I'm a pretty strong character that thought, I'm going to fight this. I'm just going to carry on. They're not going to get to me. But they were chipping away at me. Sorry, every day. These culminated in me making a complaint. They then took it further, but nobody in the office would support me. They pretended the things that were being said, things like, oh my God, don't touch that. She's got AIDS. Have you covered that in plastics today? Her food's been near mine in the fridge. It was pretty horrendous. As time went on, it got really bad. I'd been through one disciplinary, but luckily we had a new supervisor who came in, and he could see what was happening. He could see it was quite a negative environment, and he tried his best to make things better. This one particular day, the conversation was pretty harsh. There were two of what I call the bullying people in my office that was stood pretty near my desk, but right next to his. And one of them was stood doing this, going, well, don't worry. She may think she's clever. I'd done quite well that week. And they hadn't. And she's going to get her own. Don't worry. We can carry on picking at her until she hangs herself as well. Once again, referring to my previous partner who took his life. People with AIDS shouldn't be in here. He'd actually heard everything that was said, looked over to me and emailed through, Anita, do not worry. I've heard everything. Don't. And he could see I literally was crying my eyes out at my desk. The boy that was next to me took my hand and said, don't leave yet, Anita, but when you're ready, we'll leave the office. We'll go outside for a cigarette, which is what we did. He was so supportive. He'd only been working in the place for about 6 months. And if it wasn't for him and the new supervisor, nothing actually would have been done within my workplace. I then went through a whole new disciplinary where there's one person, the main character, was, I say character like it was a story, this was actually a real thing that happened, was sacked. I now know he still got a reference from one of the managers for the position that he's in now. And the other person was given, told that if this continued, he would be disciplined as well. It did continue. We had a new person that came into the office, and it is quite I'm saying like a male, like it's just their fault. Women can be just as, but it was quite a male environment that I was in. And the new guy was literally at the desk behind me, and he was like, oh, checking out who the new people, like talking about the women in the office. And he's like, oh, Anita's a bit of all right. He said, like, what's the score with her? Is she single? And he went, oh, forget it, mate. She's riddled. She used quite a few other profanities with that. I froze at my desk because I could hear them. They literally were stood behind me. As I turned around to my senior manager, who at no point in any of this was ever supportive. He was quite negative when I spoke to him privately in the office, in like as one-to-ones. I said, I can't deal with this anymore. It was really making me depressed. And he was like, what do you want me to do? I looked at him and he just shrugged his shoulders and put his head down. Conversation then continued about other females in the office. Once I'd stopped getting upset, I emailed my manager and said, I need to speak to you. We went outside of the office space and I said, I need you to do something. He said, you know what, Anita, if you just kept your head down, you wouldn't hear what people say about you. This was even after going through what I'd gone through. I wasn't strong enough. I wish. Colin supported me for years. So was George House. And I wish I'd had the strength then to go back. But I was broken. This had gone on for 18 months. And I just didn't have it. So I handed in my resignation and left my position. And 3 months later, got back in touch with George House when I was ready to talk. It seems like I'm not now, but I don't think I'll ever not cry when I talk about this, because it makes me so sad that they could break. And Colin knows me very well, quite a strong character, and make me self-harm, make me drink, make me feel less of myself. And it took me a lot to build myself up. Thankfully, George House stepped in with the big loving arms, and the little annoying character's back, and I'm loud and proud again. I came out about my status in March this year on social media, and I did that because of the strength that George House gave me. And I went back to positive speaking. I work with an amazing young man called Paul. I call myself his Eliza Doolittle, because he's determined to make me speak properly and one day do it without getting upset. But I'm very proud of what I do. And I'm proud of what George House has made me back to being myself. But I think it's very sad in 2023 that people can still be so mean and cruel, and that my status can still hold me back. I feel a lot stronger and a lot better for the support that I've got, but I didn't get that in my workplace. There wasn't one person, but except for that young lad, Mark. If it wasn't for him and the new supervisor, none of this would have culminated in anyone losing their positions, and I wouldn't have felt supported. But I will be forever grateful for George House and to Joe for giving me the opportunity to speak to you today, because it takes a lot for people to say, I've been hurt and damaged. And I think for you guys in the workplace, until things change dramatically, people like me will sadly lose our lives, will sadly not go back to work. And we're amazing people to have in your workplace.
Anita, you're amazing. Thank you so much for sharing your story. We all really appreciate it. There's so much love coming through on the chat for you. I hope you can see that. So many wonderful messages. We're so grateful to have you here with us today. So thank you so much. Really means a lot. We'll now hand over to Ian, who's joining us from Greater Manchester Good Employment Charter. And Ian's going to talk to us about his knowledge and experience of supporting employers to improve employment standards so that stories like Anita's don't happen.
Joe, thank you very much. No pressure to follow that, Anita. What an amazing story, amazing bravery to communicate it in such a passionate way. So thank you for that. We used a bit of a strap line during Good Employment Week in June, and we said that good work is life-changing. And you are the embodiment of that, actually, because we know how bad work and bad work environments can impact on people. But when you find a good place that's authentic, that allows the real you to come through, you're going to give of your best in the workplace. And it's not only best for you, it's best for the employer, and it's best for the people you work with. I'll come back to some of that. For those of you who are on the call, and perhaps you may not have heard of the Good Employment Charter, but let me give you a little bit of background first. The Good Employment Charter was a twinkle in Andy Burnham's eye before he was elected in 2017. And the notion then was to have actually a Good Employers Charter. I think Andy wanted everything involved in this, not just employment standards, but environmental, social giving, etc. But perhaps too complicated. So we focused just on employment standards. And after 18 months of consulting everybody about what should be in the Charter, we had a framework developed that looks at 7 characteristics of good employment, and they cover secure work, pay, recruitment, flexible work, employee voice, health and well-being, and good management. And we have a framework of criteria that we work with employers to determine how they can develop their approaches to all of those issues to become better employers. I think that framework, you'll probably think, well, equality is missing in that framework, and it is. It is explicitly missing, but it's not in the sense that it's woven all the way through every other aspect. And there are other aspects that lay on top of those 7 things, like leadership. And just listening to Anita's story, leadership creates culture and values in an organization if it's correct. And without the right kind of leadership, the right sort of culture, the right sort of values, that terrible behavior that Anita describes goes unchecked, can be perpetuated, isn't called out. People aren't brave enough to call it out. And that's a poisonous environment that, frankly, we can't allow to exist in this day and age. To date, we've engaged with around 1,600 employers across Greater Manchester since we launched the Charter fully in 2020. We've got about 100 members who meet the standards, and we've got about 700 plus supporters who are working their way towards becoming a better employer. We're delighted to have worked with Colin and Joe on this particular piece of guidance, this particular toolkit, because it will help support our employers to do better in this space. And I'll be perfectly honest, it's probably something that we would gloss over normally. So thank you for bringing and shining a light on it. We work with a coalition of the willing in many regards. They either are good employers or they're well-intentioned employers. A lot of employers are well-intentioned, but actually don't know what the right thing to do is. And filling those gaps of well-intentioned with really well-researched, well-evidenced guidance and advice, like the toolkits providing for us today, will really help and guide our employers moving forward on this particular issue. And I think it does have, not just on HIV stigma, but other stigmas. The same principles that you're espousing in the toolkit can move right across how employers deal with some of the more difficult issues that sometimes they have to face in a workplace. We are very keen to work with the worst employers, though. Although we're a good employment charter, we want to work with all employers to take them on a journey to become better employers. And from things like recruitment, and Colin, your point about health questionnaires, from the outset, for instance, we made it a condition to ban the box. That box that says, have you got a criminal record or not? Really, that shouldn't matter until you get the job offered. And even then, only if it impacts on the actual role you're going to perform. And from this conversation today, Colin, I'm going to take away the point about health questionnaires. And similarly, we can start asking questions about why on earth are you asking at that stage about health conditions when it may not impact on the job, and secondly, why would you ask for it in the first place? Listen, I'll leave you with some thoughts about the state of the employment market, because the employment market has changed drastically over the last 3 years. Brexit has had an impact on the employment market. COVID has had an impact on the employment market. We've seen a great resignation across many parts of the economy. And for the employers who are listening out there, the more you close off the employment market through prejudice and bad decision making, the more you're losing out on skilled workforce, whether that be young people, old people, HIV positive people. You need as many skills and as a diverse workforce as you can. We've got loads of evidence that tell us that the more diverse a workforce is, the more productive it will be. And you're cutting your nose off to spite your face if you don't accept that and you move towards a more closed approach to your recruitment policy. So please pick up this guide, understand the issues, and then change your practices if they aren't in line. So thank you, Colin. Thank you, Joe. And Anita, thank you for your testimony. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Ian. And thank you to Colin and Anita as well for your time. And we've got about 10 minutes left for questions now. So the floor is yours, everyone that's joining in. Please feel free to type a question into the chat. I'll put it to Colin, Anita, or Ian. The guide is now live and available to view and download from our website. I'll just send the link to the website into the chat now. And there's also an email address there, pash@thebha.org.uk, if you have any more questions or you want to follow this up at all, because we all live and breathe this stuff and we're very happy to talk about it. So you're very welcome to ask us any question. So we've got a question here from Mark Mills. I don't know, Anita, if you can see this. It says, Anita, through your experiences, what did you learn about yourself?
I think I learned I was stronger than what I realised. It's hard when it wasn't just what the bullies were doing in the workplace. It was the 15, 20 other people who did nothing that shocked me. People that I'd supported, I'd helped in so many different ways. So with me, Mark, I'll be honest, it made me, what happened initially triggered me to forget. And I just believed, like I did the first day I found out, that I was dirty, I wasn't worthy. All these labels came back to me that I thought I'd got rid of a long time ago. And I realised I'd allowed them to put these labels back on me and I had to take them off. It was very hard. It was through a lot of counselling with George House and a lot of support from my amazing friend group. But yeah, I learned that I'm still strong. I've still got it and I can still fight. And that was the best thing I took, I think.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Anita. If anyone else has any more questions, please feel free to send them in on the chat. We're here until 1:45.
Joe, there's one there from John. Sorry, I don't know whether you'd seen it. Sorry if you were going for it, from John, about real concerns for migrant workers recruited into health and social care jobs. I wonder whether John wants to just say a little bit more about that.
Yep, John, we can see your comment. If you have more questions about that, feel free to write it in.
Yes, thank you. Sorry, I had to return and it went in too quickly. So sorry about that. Yeah, sorry. It's just we're conscious on the other side of the Pennines over in Calderdale and Kirklees, and Colin, just really on the back of some of the stuff you were saying, and then Ian was saying about the coalition of the willing. Lots of migrant workers into health and social care jobs are coming through agencies. Some really poor practice, some really probably really unlawful practice, holding passports and people getting paid very poorly and so on and so forth. And we do know in York, in our part of Yorkshire, where clinicians are telling us that there's a large number of people coming through, really struggling financially, really struggling with their health, often coming with additional conditions and stuff. And I'm not sure many of those folk would have the voices perhaps that Anita had. And Anita, amazing what you did, and I would never hopefully see yourself as broken, because that's not what you're presenting as. So and thank you for sharing that. But my concern for migrant workers in the health service or social care, where they will have very few rights, won't have a voice, be too scared to speak up and so forth. So more of a probably more for rant, Colin. So I don't know if you can respond to that or well, thank you.
I mean, only to agree with you, John. I think you make a really valid point, and we've certainly seen some of that here at George House. Just I think it's about making that what you're talking about, making everybody aware of that, and making sure that people are supportive, that people can support those people who are at real risk of being exploited. I mean, certainly around, just to refer back to health questionnaires, I think some of the people we know who've had those health questionnaires before applying for a job have been people who may not necessarily have understood the system themselves, and we suspect are being exploited in that sense.
Yeah.
You know, in the sense that, I'm sorry, if you're going to take your HIV, I really don't want you. And of course, we know that's illegal and wrong on all levels. And you're right. I think it's a question of us all being aware of that in the organisations that we work in and being ready to provide the support that we need to provide.
John, I think it's a really, really good point that you've raised. There's a few things to say. I think the health system needs to wake up that the money that's going into particularly social care is, in a sense, forcing low-paid, insecure work. And the machine is feeding itself, because that will only end up in ill health. If people are insecure and not got enough money to have a decent standard of living, then they're going to end up in the other end of the sausage machine in the health service. Actually, this Friday, together with health partners, we are meeting with social care directors and commissioners, particularly around the workforce within social care, recognizing that while social care in homes, etc., we have taken the view in Greater Manchester that all commissioners will be paid the real living wage, or all staff will be paid the real living wage. We want to go further around secure work, and we also want to talk about voice. And we're bringing a consortium of different people together, including public health, and funnily enough, transport. You know, transport's key to this. Peripatetic workers going from home to home, looking after people, can't get around the city because they've got to pay for themselves. So, you know, they've got to jump on buses. Surely we can have a blue light system, a blue light card system for transport, just like we have for the NHS staff. So there's a whole range of things we're starting to play with. And just on your point, and it's a fair point, about the coalition of the willing, we're very aware of where bad work exists. And bad work, it does exist in places like social care, hospitality, retail. Difficult sectors to reach, but nonetheless, that's where our targets are. Thanks, John.
Thanks, Ian. Thanks so much, John, for your question. In the few minutes left, I'd like to hand over to Paul Fairweather. You've got a question for us. Thanks, Paul. You've got a comment for the group and a question about how can we ensure there's training for staff in the workplace around HIV.
Yeah, I'm Paul Fairweather. I work for George Houseless as well. I manage our Positive Speakers project. And he's just one of my amazing volunteers. And we run HIV awareness training based around our experiences living with the virus. And just to plug in the work, we have run some very specific courses for employers, particularly for HR staff, so we can gear the training to people talking about the Equality Act and reasonable adjustments. But I think we've also run lots of training for GP practices, work in schools. But I think for all staff, actually, it's really important that people have a chance to do their HIV training. So I suppose the question is really, any thoughts on how we make sure that actually this booklet gets widely publicised and actually that we can provide training for particularly HR people, but in a sense, anyone who's managing staff needs to be able to support people and be aware of HIV issues.
Thanks, Paul.
Well, look, I can come in a little bit. Thanks for your question, Paul. We will certainly be promoting the booklet far and wide to our members. We'll undoubtedly, because Good Employment Week, we turned on it our head. We don't talk to employers during Good Employment Week. We talk to employees. That's the focus. And next year we will certainly, and we're having a focus on equality issues next year. And that will certainly be one of the toolkits, one of the tools in the kit that we will use next year. But Paul, I would welcome a conversation with you and others at George House Trust about perhaps we together jointly put on a webinar or something of similar, or training session for some of our members. We'd be happy to do that together.
Thanks, Ian. Did anyone want to say anything more in response to Paul? If not, I'll move on.
Can I say something? Sorry.
Yes, sure.
Yeah, I work in Bradford Council, and I'm holding the portfolio for sexual health. And I was just wondering whether we could actually have a two-pronged approach where, of course, the employer is made aware of this booklet, and also the employee has a way of being informed, or possibly during the employment for those who are already employed, and during the employment, why can't it also be included as under the equality? That there is normally an equality thing at the bottom of the application. If HIV can be highlighted, just so that people know how serious these things can affect people's lives. Honestly, one would not think that in this time people will still behave like that and be gang up against somebody who's got HIV or who may be different from them. And this comes to the dehumanizing of people. And I think HIV, if at all we see that it's a problem, I think it needs to be included in the application form, whether people are aware of that inequality as a special note at the bottom. I'm not sure, but that's just my suggestion.
Yeah, thank you for your question. Colin, do you want to pick up?
I just wanted to say, I think it's a really important point. And I think what we're trying to work towards is with one project that we're working with called Skilling Up with Manchester City Council, getting people back into work, is creating positive employers with a almost kind of a kite mark, so that they can actually, say we are a positive employer, we are HIV aware. I think that would be a huge step forward for. I mean, it's a bigger task than just training a couple of local organisations, but I think we would want to see employees actually stating that they were HIV aware. And I think then for people who are positive applying for jobs, that is so much more encouraging and brings down so many barriers.
Yeah. Absolutely. Thank you so much, everyone. We're going to end it there. We've run out of time, unfortunately. But thank you so much for taking part and for all your questions. And the guide is available on the BHA website. That's thebha.org.uk. You can download it for free. You can view it for free online. Please feel free to use it. Pass it around within your workplaces. Talk to your managers about it. Talk to your employees about it. Share it with friends, with family. It's there to be used. So thank you so much for joining, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Joe.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you so much to my esteemed panel, Colin, Anita, and Ian. I really appreciate your time.
Pleasure. Thank you.
It's been great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.